Jai Gurudev. Welcome to today's sharing of a saint. It's my special privilege to introduce to you Jñāneśvara and his family. Some of you may be familiar with him already a little bit. I personally wasn't until not too long ago. Actually, in 2015, when we went to the second Kumbh Mela with Guruji to Nashik in Maharashtra, we also visited his Samadhi place. And at the time I had, Guruji's introducing us to so much and to so many saints that it's easy to think that, okay, there's just another saint and you can't digest and process everyone you're meeting or you're hearing about. But little did I know that in his case, he's one of the greatest saints ever. But still actually largely unknown, at least in the West. Not in Maharashtra, there he's very known. But even outside of Maharashtra, I would argue probably not so much known. And so it's a wonderful opportunity to highlight his life more for us here now and for those who are going to watch this later on YouTube. And hopefully a little humble contribution to change the fact that he's less known than he should be, because as you will hopefully see today, his life is extraordinary and he was an extraordinary person for good reasons. So the way I want to approach this is I will share with you firstly his life story and that of his family. And the second part will be diving a bit into his teachings. You will see throughout that there are many. I will try to also connect it a little bit with Guruji and Guruji's teachings and Guruji's life, because there's a lot of parallels, a lot of connecting points. And that's basically it. There will be some final points that I will make at the end, but these are the two main sharings of today. Jñāneśvara, just to put it a bit into context, when he was born, before I go to the beginning of the story, before even his birth, was 1275. So he was active and alive in the 13th century. And his life actually was very short. He only lived 21 years. And he's considered the founder of the Varkari movement itself, to which so many great saints belong, like Namdev, Eknath, Tukaram, and many others. So let's start. The life of Jñāneśvara, there's a pre-story, like always, obviously, but it's a very interesting one in this case. Vittal Pant, who you see, this is a screenshot of, there's several movies about Jñāneśvara's life. This one is a more recent one. And I took it because it depicts three characters in one go that I want to introduce you. So firstly, Vittal Pant, who is in the middle, that's the father of Jñāneśvara. And he went to Swami Ramananda, who is on the left here, to Varanasi. He asked for sannyas. So he asked to be initiated. And he became a Swami called under the name Chaitanya Swami. He was actually he had a strong longing for that avenue, for that path. He came from an already very spiritual family, and he had a strong connection to God. And he became actually, probably from what we know from the historic records, the foremost disciple of Swami Ramananda. Swami Ramananda, not to be confused with, there are other Swamis in the history of India that have the same name. And the problem was, though, that Vittal Pant was already married. But he didn't say. He didn't, when asked, because you need the permission of the wife to take sannyas, and he withheld that information when he was asked. So essentially, he lied to his guru. And originally, there's a whole story that I want to reveal to you first. So Rakumabai, that's his wife on the right, she was 8 years old at the time of their marriage, which was a very unusual one, because Vittal Pant, he went on a pilgrimage southward, and he was passing through Alandi. This is the birthplace of Jñāneśvara and his sister and his brothers. And there was a local chief there by the name Shidopant. And he invited him to stay at his house, because he saw that this man is extraordinary, that he's something special about him. And then he had a dream, Shidopant. And in that dream, he found himself praying to Lord Vittal. And Vittal, there was a celestial voice ordering him to offer his daughter to Vittal Pant. And this voice said, great souls will be born from this union for the good of the world. So imagine, like, the daughter is 8 years old. Vittal Pant is not at all interested in marriage. He's on the way, like, he's very much on the way of becoming a sannyas. So this, he was naturally hesitating to fulfill that order. After all, it's just a dream, right? But we know from Guruji, and in Guruji's case, dreams, there are dreams and there are dreams. Like when Guruji appears in a dream, it's different. There is a reality factor to the dream, because you can't make these things up. You can't dream of Guruji even. We've heard this many times. This is not a product of our imagination. And neither was it in this case, as you would find out, because Vittal Pant then, when he heard this, because he shared this with him, the father of Rakumabai, he was willing to obey, but he needed a confirmation on his side also. So he then received a similar dream. And a yogi visited him in that dream, and everything was like confirmed. He said, yes, this is meant to be, this is meant to happen, do it, basically. So the marriage took place, and they went off back to Alandi, spent many years there. Nothing happened. There were no children born to them for a longer period of time. I mean, firstly, of course, his wife needed to grow up, but even then, it took some time. And they took many pilgrimages. They were both very pious parents. And so there was a time where Vittal Pant had to take care of his parents who were aged and who were sick. So he did so, and then an epidemic took their lives. So his parents gone now, and he became even more restless at that point in his life. There were no children. He still had that longing. And so at some point he just left for Varanasi. And that's when this, somebody just called me. I should have switched off the Wi-Fi from this as well. So, so he went to Varanasi, and that's when the meeting took place with Swami Ramananda. What happened then, there were pilgrims from Alandi who went to Varanasi, to Kashi, and reported to Rakumabai that they saw Vittal Pant as a sannyas. So, because she was still hoping that he would return, and there was that promise that they would, have children. This was the prophecy, basically. And she would have given him permission after the children would have come, but not before. So she began to lead a life of austerity and prayer. At some point, Swami Ramananda himself, he went south. It's when you see the story unfolding, it's I'm telling you this story now that spanned over many, many years in a nutshell. But this is, if we look at our lives as well, it's how everything is perfectly orchestrated. Each one of us, our life, how it unfolded to the point that we come into contact with Guruji. And then it seems like somehow random, but we know, maybe even in that moment itself, later on when we reflect, that nothing happened by chance. It's all a wonderful divine orchestration. So same thing here in the life of Vittal Pant and his family. So Swami Ramananda goes south, and Rakumabai, I'll add here their names as well. So they're very simple slides. I had to do them 2 weeks ago when I wasn't yet sure what I will exactly cover. So they're very rough. Rakumabai, she went to Guru Ramanand just to ask for blessings because she was a pious woman, and she had no other thought other than pay her respects to this great Swami that was passing by. And he then gave a casual blessing and said, "May you have a son, or maybe even multiple children." And she was perplexed and somehow almost embarrassed, smiled a little bit, but she didn't say anything. Then he noticed her reaction, said, why are you smiling? And she shared, well, my husband is not with me. He took sannyas in Varanasi, so I don't think it's possible for me to have children. And then he was wondering, which guru initiated him against, let's say, the order, against the custom. Thinking of, sometimes this happens to us, we think who did this to us? Who was so stupid to take my tablet and in the end only to find out that it was myself, right? So he realized, Swami Ramanand realized then that actually he was that guru that initiated Vittal Pant. And so he became angry because he realized what had happened. He stopped his pilgrimage, he returned back to Varanasi, took Rakumabai with him, and confronted Vittal Pant. And of course, he had to admit that this is the truth. So Ramanand then ordered him, he said, okay, what happened. I order you now to go back with your wife and lead a grihastha life. Then everything is fine. I forgive you, but you have to follow my order. So Vittal Pant, with a heavy heart, but he was dedicated to his guru, he accepted that order and went back to grihastha life. Now that in and of itself is extraordinary, because at least in that region of Alandi have never happened before. This was such a shocking thing at the time. Nowadays it's a bit less shocking, unfortunately, perhaps, but back then it was totally out of place. Like the society didn't know what to do with it. It was so unheard of, and not in a good way. Like it was considered a big sin, actually, to become a sannyas and then go back to grihastha life. So that's why the community, the society, was very hard on the couple. Like, they became outcasts instantly. I mean, he was a Brahmin, but he lost his status as a result of this and fell, let's say, to the lowest level of society. Now, they left the town because it was difficult to handle, difficult to be surrounded by people who are your enemies, essentially, who look down at you. And when you look, also there's a wonderful movie which I will refer to you at the end of the presentation, which I really recommend you to watch. It's from 1940. Those old movies, they have this special bhav, and it's a great way to connect with these stories of the saints. So you will also, if you watch that movie, you will get a taste of the treatment that society gave to the family. Firstly to the parents, and then later on also to the children, because the children were the children of these parents that were stained in the eyes of society. So it was a really harsh and terrible treatment. But this is not so unusual if we look at the life of saints throughout the centuries, both East and West. I could give you examples of Western saints, Christian saints, that were even harshly treated by their own peers, like by the church itself. So often, life of saints, we know they're saints and we glorify them and we look at their wonderful life. But when you look at the life itself, and of course, when we just summarize it in 1 hour or so, it sounds all just like a wonderful journey from challenge to sainthood, and it doesn't really hurt that much. But if we, for a moment, if we put ourselves into the shoes, and we imagine that this wasn't just an hour or a day or a week, but it was years of ill treatment, then we get a taste of the sort of challenge that they must have undergone. And we, of course, individually, we also undergo challenges, but it may help us to put it into perspective when we look at the life of saints. It's normal. They didn't, even if they were already born saints, like in this case, they still had to go through that. It's like to serve an example for us, to make it perhaps also just more relatable and easier for us to digest our own challenges. You can see that time and time again. So these Orthodox Brahmins also of that region, this is also another phenomenon that we see, this like high priests, both East and West. So it's not just the high priests, let's say around the time of Jesus, that were rigid and dogmatic up to the point of condemning him to die even. But we see this type of behavior also in the East, like in the story of Jñāneśvara and his parents. These Orthodox priests were very rigid. They were dogmatic. And so they looked at the scripture because their foundation was very much scripture-based. And they couldn't find any way out. Like for them, based on the scripture, the parents were condemned, and there was no amends. There was no way to. They didn't find anything in the scripture, and because they held so much onto the scripture, there was no solution for them in sight. Not even for the children. They were like stuck. So the parents were forced to live this life of being out at the outcasts, let's say. And so they lived outside the village for many years, actually. The children didn't come straight away. But let's now see, have a look at the family, at the children. So eventually, the children came. The first one, this was about after 12 years of life in Alandi, was Nivruti. Nivruti was the eldest of the 4 siblings. There's 4 in total. He was born in 1273. Nivruti literally means the one who controls the senses. And actually, if we look at the life of the sequence of the 4 children, there's a story in and of itself being told, because these are not only Jñāneśvara, but also his siblings were extraordinary beings. So controller of the senses suggests that this is the first thing that we need to do on the path. So he comes first. And you see that also in the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna very early on in chapter 2 sets that tone. Says like, first thing, before even controlling your mind, you have to control your senses. Because if you don't, then the senses will drag the mind wherever they want to go. Nivruti is considered an incarnation of Shiva himself. And he, even then, as we will see later on, became the guru of Jñāneśvara because he was his elder brother. There's a special story that I will share with you how that came about. So then, Jñāneśvara himself was next. That was in 1275. Always like 2 years span. His name contains the notion of Gyan, of knowledge. So he was an embodiment, an incarnation of knowledge. But when we hear knowledge, often we have this maybe wrong notion of what knowledge means. There is knowledge, of course, like intellectual type knowledge, factual type knowledge. Knowing, for example, these dates, you could say that's also knowledge. But in his case, obviously, it's pointing to the highest knowledge. He was an embodiment of that highest knowledge because he's considered none other than Narayana himself. But he also came to spread that knowledge of the self because it was very much needed during that time. And we can see that over and over again, as Krishna famously declares in the Bhagavad Gita, when adharma goes up and when dharma goes down, I incarnate. So this happened also during that time. Then came, and so it's also like in the steps, in the sequence, attaining knowledge of self. So after you've controlled your senses, attain knowledge. Then, if you have that knowledge, that's why Guruji is giving so much importance to knowledge. Jñāneśvara was a true jnani. He knew God, like he was God. But he also gave us this example of what it means to know God. But if you have this kind of knowledge, then Sopan came, the next brother, 2 years later. And Sopan literally means, there's different ways of translating, but the way or steps. We could even say ladder, like steps of ascending, because we want to rise. We want to ascend on the spiritual ladder. But to rise on the spiritual ladder is a question of taking steps. Sopan means these steps. But this becomes easy when you have the right knowledge. So this is what is suggested. Once you have that knowledge, you're kind of cruising along. It's no longer very hard. You still have to walk, but you have now that clarity. you have a clear goal in sight, and so it becomes easy when you have divine knowledge. And, finally, 2 years later, the last of the sibling, Muktabai, was born in 1279, and she's considered an incarnation of Divine Mother, of Lakshmi herself. And she symbolizes this liberation, the culmination of the first 3 steps. When we walk the path in this way, with that divine knowledge, freedom, liberation comes naturally. So as we can see, the 4 together, they are the fullness of God Himself. It's such a wonderful story. The more you look into it, the more you study it. It's unique in its own way. They were all super young and super enlightened, but like I already outlined, they had a very difficult life in so many ways. So here's a picture from that other movie from 1940. It's a screenshot where it shows them all together. And really, if you get a chance, if you haven't seen it already, even if you have seen it already, watch it again. It's just, these movies are such a treasure. So, because of the parents, the children were also denied. They were even denied the thread ceremony, the sacred thread that happens at a certain age to become full members of the Brahmin caste. But because their parents were seen as downfall, and the priests, these high priests that were dogmatic, were not ready to initiate them. And so this essentially meant that they were excommunicated fully from society. This was very difficult to bear. Vittalpant, he asked the priests, okay, fine, you can't help me, but at least, my children are innocent. What do they have to do with this? At least grant them this. So the pundits, the priests, they thought about it, and they tried to help somehow, but they struggled. They didn't find again, because they were so much, their authority was solely based on the scripture, and the scripture didn't give them a solution for this. This is when, as much as scripture is important, if we get too hung up on scripture, there is, as Krishna himself even in the Bhagavad Gita shows, there is something beyond even if the scripture come from God himself. The final conclusion of the scripture is something that is beyond the scripture. And so they suggested, okay, we can't really help you. You have to go to another place, a place called Paitan, which is also in Maharashtra. It's about 200 kilometers away from Alandi, so several days walking distance. If you imagine Maharashtra, where all of this took place, Maharashtra is quite big as a state. It's bigger than Italy, for example, in terms of size. Population-wise, nowadays, it's bigger than Italy and Spain combined, for example, just to give you a sense of magnitude. So this is a big country in and of itself. And it's placed on the west side, middle west of India, going deep into the continent about halfway through. But all of these stories, Alandi, Paitan, Nashik, this is all more on the western side of Maharashtra, closer to Mumbai, let's say, close to Pune also, because Alandi is very close to Pune. And so they sent them there because there were some extra high priests there that they felt, okay, these are the crème de la crème of the priests. Go and check with them. They can perhaps help you. So they went there. But on the way, so there was quite a journey. They did various penances. They went to a place called Triambakeshwar near Nashik, where we went with Guruji also back in 2015. And one night, this is now an important event for the remainder of the story, they were in nature, in the forests, and one night a roaring tiger all of a sudden appeared. Imagine in the wilderness, like you're facing a wild beast like that. So everybody fled in all directions. Everybody was safe, but a family member was lost. And this family member was Nivriti, the eldest. He found himself approaching a cave, and then in that cave he saw a luminous figure meditating. And this yogi, this shining yogi, became his guru. His name was Gahainath. And he was in the lineage of Gorakshanath. This was a special branch of Shaivism. Actually, he's very famous, Gorakshanath. And interestingly, the great-grandfather of Nivriti was initiated directly already by this great guru. So in a way, they liaised back to that lineage. And he was only 10 years old in that moment when that happened. So the yogi was very impressed by the boy, the wisdom that he already had, and he initiated him. So now Nivriti was formally initiated into a lineage, only 10 years old. And the yogi smiled when that happened and said, actually, his guru had already foreseen this happening. So this was already prophesized. And he was asked to initiate that boy when that happens, to initiate him into the knowledge of the self, which he then passed on to Jñāneśvara, and Jñāneśvara in turn to his brother and sister. So this guru was part of this Nath tradition. And that's why Nivriti also received the name Nath afterwards, Nivritinath. This whole transfer of knowledge happened in only 7 days because he was so ready, so receptive. It happened almost in an instant. And the guru said to him, also to Nivriti, to pass it on to his siblings, and that Jñāneśvara has a mission to fulfill in this world and will be a guide to many, which, as we know, happened. Furthermore, if we look at how the family got taught, we shouldn't forget to mention also Vittalpant, because he himself was quite knowledgeable, and because they were, as a family, living as outcasts, they didn't go to school, so the parents taught them everything they knew, and so they also, the father was literally also a second guru to them all. But eventually, they returned. Sorry, first they tried to get. Actually, no, they returned to Alandi and wanted to get this this confirmation, at least for the children, but also for the parents. But the priests were hard, and they didn't budge. They didn't move. They said the only atonement is to give up their lives. That's the only way they can atone for their sin. So eventually, actually, both of them did. The father went first, according to historic records. the mother a year later in the movie that you see them actually together jumping into the holy rivers and giving up their life. Imagine what a dramatic moment for the children, because they were super young, like as you see them here in the movie screenshot. So all of a sudden they're without parents, and God himself basically became a parent to them. You may be aware that one of the names of Vittal himself is Mauli, which suggests that he is also a mother. Same is true for Jñāneśvara. He also goes by the name Mauli. There is that element to the Guru and to God of the mother. He's also a mother to us. I feel that very strongly. I mean, we're now celebrating Navaratri, but even my own personal encounter with Guruji at the very beginning, 25 years ago, when he came and he called me, there was that feeling of a mother calling her children. It's very strong. So the children now, they were still outcasts, and they tried to get initiated, to receive the sacred thread. And this takes us to the following story, which is a major story in the life of the siblings. After being ridiculed so many times, they went and met these priests in Paitan. And they had actually a letter of recommendation from one Pandit from Alandi who took pity on them, so that at least they were allowed to get a little hearing. But then they were ridiculed. They were like not taken serious, and nobody wanted to have anything to do with them, because the mindset of that time, and sometimes this still exists today, is such that if you're stained, nobody wants. It's like you're untouchable. Even your shadow should not touch us, right? So much, such an extreme stance. But then history had to unfold itself, and Jñāneśvara, with confidence, challenged those priests and said, well, and this is one main teaching of his, is that everything is God. How can you suggest that God is not present, for example, in us? And just this notion itself was a challenge for the priests. They felt provoked by that. And Jñāneśvara said, look, my soul is no different from the soul of that bull. There was a bull standing, like in so many places in India you see cows and bulls. Like that bull, like the soul of that bull and mine is the same. Narayana, Brahman, is omnipresent, and he resides, as the Gita famously declares, in every being. And then the priests, kind of again to ridicule him, said, well, if that were possible, then make this buffalo chant the Vedas. So then Jñāneśvara accepted that challenge and started to recite the Rig Veda. In the movie, even in that moment, if you watch the movie, they interfere and they even want to forbid him to chant the Vedas, because he's not eligible in their eyes to even chant the Vedas. So then they make him shut up. And in that moment, the buffalo takes over and continues the same verse perfectly to the end. Everybody is shocked. Everybody is realizing, wow, these are not ordinary boys. These are not ordinary beings. And completely changes everything. They are transformed. They are realizing that they're standing in front of saints, divine incarnations. They bow down, they ask for forgiveness, and they issue that letter that they needed so badly, finally. So they return to Alandi with that letter, but again, in Alandi, even though they have that letter now finally, still there is a blockage. Still they're not being admitted. And so they have to leave. Again, they go and travel. And gradually, there's a saying that the prophet in his own country is never respected. You see that in the life of Jesus. You see that now in the life of Jñāneśvara. Maybe less so in Guruji's case, but even there, I don't think he's as much recognized in Mauritius as he should be. But that's normal. That's human nature. Because whatever is near, we always think that what is far is better than what is near. So the fame gradually spread because they were who they were, and so it shines through. And little by little, they're very humble at the same time, but there's no denial of their divinity. And during that time, this is also the time where they started to connect with the different saints, which I will show you later on, because there were so many saints in one go during that time, like perhaps never before, and perhaps never since then. Namdev, Janabai, we will see them in a moment, and so many others. And there's something really beautiful when we study Jñāneśvara's life, Namdev's life, and all these saints. They were so simple, but powerful, deep. And they would come together. They had that love for each another, which is very inspiring. And they would chant, they would sing. So the Kirtan movement actually didn't start with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, as many may think in the West, because of the way that Kirtan came to the West through the Gaudiya Sampradaya primarily. But it started already back then, hundreds of years earlier. And when one reads about the accounts, one gets a feeling, an idea of how great it must have been to be present in that moment when Namdev and the like were chanting for hours and hours, sometimes for days. So as the fame spread, of course, there's still challenges, and some people still trying to go against the children. So there is another miracle that happened, which is worth mentioning. There's, of course, more, but these are some of the key episodes in Jñāneśvara's life. There is that story. It's called Changadev Pasashti. Pasashti means actually 65, because it's connected to 65 verses that Jñāneśvara wrote to Changadev. Changadev was a very special yogi who had thousands of followers, and he had great siddhis, special powers. So much so that he was able to renew his body. Every year he would do a certain technique and renew his cells. So he had yogic techniques that he applied. And he was, at that point in time, he was allegedly 1400 years old already. And so you can imagine somebody with these kind of skills, there were a lot of people fascinated by that. And so he had thousands of followers. And when he heard about Jñāneśvara, he wanted to meet him. He wanted to get to know him. In the movie, it suggested that some people wanted to use him, instrumentalize him to put Jñāneśvara down. I don't know whether that's historically accurate. But in any case, what's definitely what happened was they met. He wanted to meet him, and even though he was this great yogi, he didn't really know how to address Jñāneśvara. He was at a loss of what to say. So in the movie you see like him trying to write something, and he gives up in a way and then says, okay, you know what, I'll just send him an empty letter and he will know. If he's, if he is somehow special, he will know what I'm trying to say. So he sends him an empty letter. So the children receive this empty letter, they look at it, they pass it around, and they find it amusing. It's such a contrast also. You have this old, great yogi, powerful, thousands of disciples around him. And then on the other hand, you have these 4 little children. And so they say, oh, maybe, let's reply. So Jñāneśvara replies and writes these 65 verses that convey the essence of knowledge, let's say. And when Changadev receives it, he doesn't really understand it because it's so deep. So he wants to go and meet Jñāneśvara. So he takes his whole entourage, quite impressive. If you watch the movie, you'll see like big fanfare. He rides on a tiger because he has control over all living beings. He has control over the 5 elements, actually, and he can control living beings such as a tiger, but only living beings. And so they go off to meet the children. And as they hear about it, imagine the 4 of them sitting, as you see on this image here, they sit on a wall, casually, enjoying the summer breeze. And then when they realize that they're being approached by this yogi, say, oh, let's go and meet him, let's pay our respects to him. But at the same time, they wanted to humble him also, like they wanted to teach him a lesson in their own way. So Jñāneśvara just tapped the wall gently and said, come on, wall, let's go. And so the wall starts to rise and fly, and it becomes like a flying vehicle. And they fly towards Changadev. Imagine that sight. There comes this great yogi riding on a tiger, and then these children come flying on a wall. And they land in front of him, and in that moment, he realizes he's dealing with somebody greater than him. He gets off, he has that humility, gets off the tiger, bows down to Jñāneśvara, and becomes his disciple, actually. It's very touching to see that, also that transformation. It is said that in the last century, he was again a great yogi. I don't want to mention the name, with special CDs, very well known. You can approach me later. I don't want to say it on camera because, but so it explains things sometimes. When you see the sequence of how a soul evolves, and even if you reach very great states, you have great powers, it doesn't mean, and Guruji has often said that, it doesn't mean that that's it. This is not the goal of life. He realizes in that moment when he meets Jñāneśvara, who has control also over non-living matter, to make the wall go and start flying. He realizes that, and he has this regret of having wasted his life, basically 1400 years in pursuit of cities, of great powers. He enjoys, for sure, his ego. There is an element of ego still left. Enjoys the admiration of all the people around him. But he realizes that that's actually not the purpose of life. He had, in that moment, as he met Jñāneśvara, he understood that what he should really do is focus on knowing God, not pursuing cities. That's what Guruji is also telling us. So then it is said that Jñāneśvara, when he saw the reaction of Changdev, he was full of compassion. He, he wasn't angry or anything like that. You see that throughout, like his life. He was really such a wonderful being, so inspiring. And he asked his sister Muktabai. Changdev wanted Jñāneśvara to become his guru, but he said, no, Muktabai will be your guru. So the little girl, which is an incarnation of the Divine Mother, becomes the guru of this great yogi. And he dismissed all his thousands of disciples thereafter. So he became like a child, and he became the disciple of a child guru. He said, there's a quote from him, Jnanadeva drinks in full the essence of pearls. Nivritti holds in his hands the shade of the clouds. Sopan wears the garlands of fragrance, and Muktabai cooks diamonds for her supper. And the secret of all four comes into my hands. There's a little side story also, which might be interesting for you. Visoba Kechar, maybe the name rings a bell. He was an elderly man who very much disbelieved in Jñāneśvara. You can see it also in the movie. And he was always troubling them. But Jñāneśvara's compassion was so strong that it transformed him, and he became one of his most ardent disciples, and later on, the guru of Namdev. So if you watched some while back, we had a play where we showed the encounter of Namdev meeting Visoba Kechar. It's an interesting detail here in this story. So Muktabai, she was at the time 14 years old when she became the guru of Changdev. And she started to instruct him, to give him instructions. She said, O Changdev, listen, if you want to attain salvation, the first step is sincere devotion. Devotion will bring vairagya, discrimination. Vairagya will lead to jnana. Therefore, your aim should be jnana, and your first foot must be on devotion. The next very important episode in the life, let me check the time, okay, is a very defining moment in the life of Sant Jñāneśvara, is the Jñāneśvari. The Jñāneśvari is the name of Sant Jñāneśvara's commentary on the Bhagavad Gita. Like Guruji has given his commentary for today's time, back then Sant Jñāneśvara felt inspired. It's not quite clear. In the movie it suggested that the father asks him to do that. In other historical records it is said that his elder brother, his guru, asked him to do this. Either way, he did it, and what happened is he not only gave the commentary, but he translated the Gita into Marathi, the language of the region, because we can understand it in this way. Like in the Middle Ages in Europe, the Bible was only available in Latin, for example. So only certain high priests who had the book and were able to understand Latin had access to that sacred knowledge. Only when then the Gutenberg press came and it became like there were some translations around and it started to spread, then it became more widely available, the knowledge for the normal people. But back then in Maharashtra, the language Marathi, but still today, of course, in that region, the Gita did not exist for the common people. It was not available. And Sant Jñāneśvara felt it was his divine calling to change that, to do that. So he became very much known for that, and it defines also his teachings. If we look at what he taught, it's very much aligned also with the Bhagavad Gita. Because it pained him to see the ignorance in the people. And if we look at today's state of the world, with so many people not knowing who they are and not truly knowing the purpose of life, we see that parallel. Because the Bhagavad Gita to this day, even though it is more widely available now, it's more known, but actually still in the West, perhaps even in the East, but especially in the West, it's totally underestimated. But this is about to change. There is, I think, more and more people start to, thanks to the work of Guruji, who is spreading that knowledge now more and more to the West, people start to realize what an immense treasure the Bhagavad Gita is. There is nothing like it. It's not like a question of taste and say, well, you can use the Bhagavad Gita or you can use X, Y, Z. Without disrespecting any other scripture, I would, with confidence, say, as much as I'm knowledgeable of, that there is nothing like it. If there was, for sure, Guruji would have already pointed towards that, and we would generally know about it. But the Bhagavad Gita is not for no reason such a classic, and has been. It's already very well known throughout the millennia. There's so many commentaries by great beings, great gurus and masters over the centuries. But yet, and why is that? Because it is the ultimate distillation of the meaning of life itself. Everything is contained in that one condensed scripture. And so what a source for humanity itself, because the Gita is not just for the East, for people in India. No, not at all. As we are aware, it is something for the whole world. It is a universal treasure. It is a universal gift, because it touches upon universal truths and principles that everybody should know about. So it's not about spreading some kind of religion and some kind of belief system that it's just a game of changing from one belief system to another. No, this is touching upon the actual truth, that kind of knowledge, the knowledge of the self, knowledge of God, knowledge of the truth, which Jñāneśvara brought to the people back then, about 700 years ago. And throughout the centuries, others have done that. And now, I would say historically, the stars are aligned in such a way that through Guruji, and not only through Guruji, but we can see it in there are some other masters who are spreading the Bhagavad Gita also to the West. But it's I think a time now where this is about to change. I think if we were alive 500 years from now, we would see that this was a turning point in history, and I wouldn't be surprised if in a few hundred years a lot of people, almost like the masses, are aware of the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita as a result of this spreading now. And this type of knowledge is vital. It's sort of life-saving. That's why Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita itself at the end says there is no greater service than to do that, than to spread this teaching of mine. The moment when that happened, you see it a little bit on that image where you see Sant Jñāneśvara surrounded by, there was a multitude of people when he gave the teaching, it's like when Guruji gave his commentary on the Bhagavad Gita about 8 years ago over the course of 18 days. I'm imagining a similar scene where Jñāneśvara is sitting there, this young boy, he was about 15 years old. The accounts sometimes say 14, sometimes 16, roughly 15. This young boy giving this essence of knowledge, this essence of life itself. And then there are all these people and a lot of elder men, including Changdev, the great yogis, sitting at the feet of this young boy, listening and taking in this nectar. It's quite a scene. The Jñāneśvara itself is considered one of the oldest literature piece in Marathi language. Together also with there's a second work that Jñāneśvara left behind, which is called Amrita Anubhav, which is a collection of his own experiences about the highest truth. So that's another work that is worth diving into. I haven't done it so far, but I'm mentioning it in case anybody wants to endeavor into that. But imagine how the humility of God, who comes in the form of a 15-year-old boy teaching the Bhagavad Gita. Most people, certainly in the beginning, didn't recognize his greatness. I would argue even at that point, they were fascinated. They started to realize who was before them. But like always, most people don't get it. Most people don't, because God is so humble. That's because God is the most humble. So it kind of almost is inevitable that even if he displays great miracles like the ones we already heard about, and there's others like bringing a man back who was dead to life, who actually then wrote down the Jñāneśvara for Jñāneśvara. Despite such miracles, still most people don't get it. And this is the same now. Like if we look at Guruji, there's thousands of accounts, thousands of wonderful experiences, mind-blowing experiences, yet the majority of the planet has no clue, and I would argue is not interested. It's just not ready, and it's not a criticism, it's just how it is. It was like that back then. It is like that still today. And just one more point about the Bhagavad Gita, because it is such an important scripture for us. As a reminder, I guess most of you are having the habit of reading it, ideally on a daily basis, because that's what Guruji, he rarely makes requests on Guru Purnima. He made one 8 years ago or so when he asked us to spread vegetarianism. And this past Guru Purnima, if you remember, he made one request, which has two components. He said, do your japa and read the Bhagavad Gita. So that's, and just 10 minutes, which basically equates to one verse. So this habit of taking one verse per day, ideally, like I love to use the Bhagavad Gita cards because it's a nice set of key verses. So you can just take one verse, has the commentary excerpt on the back of the card. Like that, we familiarize ourselves with the Bhagavad Gita, little by little, droplet by droplet. These kind of atomic habits. That's what there's even a famous book about that called Atomic Habits. If we break down, like Guruji was saying yesterday, if you have a big challenge, what do? You break it down. So Bhagavad Gita, Guruji's full commentary, more than 1,000 pages, to digest that's a big challenge. But if you break it down into little components, 10 minutes per day, it becomes very manageable. And so This gives me also the opportunity. Jñāneśvara's life is very much about the Bhagavad Gita for a good reason. And Guruji is continuing in that legacy and trying to make the world understand how important it is. And so we, for our own sake, for our own transformation, should try and really incorporate that into our life. 10 minutes is doable. And then it goes beyond, because as Vaishnavas, we are not just living for ourselves. We understand that we have a sacred responsibility of sharing these teachings. Like again, Krishna says at the end of the Bhagavad Gita, there's no greater service than to do that. Why is that? Because, as we see in the life of Jñāneśvara, who was this incarnation of knowledge, divine knowledge, understanding who you truly are, is a game changer. It changes everything. After that, once it's really clicked, the ride becomes smooth and you are going to return home. But without that knowledge, it's virtually impossible. So let's look a little bit at some of the teachings of Jñāneśvara. When we look at his life, humility stands out. That's why, there's just a few themes that I've listed now. There's so much that he gave, too much to cover now. But his whole life and that of his siblings radiates humility. And together with that humility, I would also add unity. This notion that God is one, something that personally I always found very appealing, like it's touched me early on in my life, even before I met Guruji, this idea that everything, the oneness, not oneness in an Advaitic sense where there is no difference, but diversity in unity. That even though we are all this diverse set of people, ultimately we are one. We are united in that ultimate truth, in the cosmic body of God. And when we have that kind of clear vision that he had of that oneness, one love, let's say, then automatically it's difficult to argue, because you see that same essence that is inside of you, inside of somebody else, and it solves everything immediately. So this is definitely something that stands out in their lives, seeing God in everything, in everybody, and through devotion to God, destroying the inequality, because this inequality that existed back then with castes that limited God, it happens over and over again. So these high priests that talk about God, but then they limit him in reality in their practice. So they don't actually see God residing in everybody. Then, important point to make, faith in the Guru. We see that time and time again, that even when God incarnates, he upholds the principle, the Guru principle. He doesn't need a Guru, but like Krishna didn't need a Guru, but he had one to set the right example for everybody. Same in Jñāneśvara's life. His elder brother, in the way everything was orchestrated, became his Guru. And he showed great respect to the Guru till the end of his life. He says, a few quotes, "The spiritual teacher is like a spring to the garden of self-realization of the aspirant, and though formless, is the form of mercy incarnate." When he says formless, it's not that, because we don't believe that God is ultimately formless, but the cosmic form of God is de facto formless for us because we can't grasp it. Then he also said, without implicit faith in the Guru, one achieves nothing. The Guru resides in one's heart like a fixed star, where one worships him incessantly. The devotee should first seek God's grace in true belief and humility. Thus will the Guru appear at the appointed time. In the fullness of time, when past karma's fruits are exhausted and new ones cease to bear fruits, the Guru directly reveals himself as the sun naturally follows the darkness. Again, we are familiar with the notion that when the disciple is ready, the master appears. That's basically what he's saying here also. When we are ready, when the time is ripe, the Guru appears. And it's not at all a random thing. We sometimes forget about that. We don't see ourselves as special. And in many ways we aren't. But at the same time, there is something, as Guruji points out repeatedly, there is something in us that the Guru sees and that waits to be awakened. And we should believe in that, because if he believes in us, it's almost like our duty and our path to salvation to believe in that as well. We're not doing ourselves a favor if we're putting ourselves down, because that's not humility. That's actually, again, the ego sort of playing tricks on us. Then there is knowledge of self, obviously, because Jñāneśvara was, his name is very much about that. And when we speak about knowledge, if we bring it back to the Bhagavad Gita, there's 2 verses in chapter 7 that highlight the rarity of true knowledge. Verse 3 in chapter 7, where it says, amongst thousands, maybe one seeks perfection. And then so on, it trickles down to say at the end, maybe one knows me truly. And further down in the same chapter, in verse 16, he speaks about the Jnāni. Jñāneśvara was a Jnāni. He really knew God, obviously, because he was an incarnation of that knowledge, of that highest truth. But he says, he's dearest to me. We ought to seek that kind of knowledge. It's not intellectual knowledge, like I said earlier, but it is knowledge of self, and it is knowledge of relationship. It's about that, like when you know somebody very much, also in a human relationship, then you can say, I know this person inside out. We're so connected. I feel what they want even before they say it. This kind of intimacy. And we want to achieve that with our Guru. And how to get there, it is through constant getting to know. Simple, like it's kind of obvious, but it takes time. Like any relationship, you don't get to know somebody overnight. We have that strong feeling when we meet him, but that's just, in a way, the beginning in this life. It's the end moment of past lives that led us, because it's for sure not the first time that we encounter him. That's why there is that recognition. But now it's that final stretch that still needs to be walked on. And that is like maybe that last part of verse 3 where he says, okay, amongst thousands one is maybe on the path of perfection. Amongst those, maybe one gets to know me. And then amongst those again, maybe one truly knows me. So we are invited now to go all the way, to really get to know him. And I'm not sure if I have time to share too much else about the teachings at the end, but I have a few jewels left that I would like perhaps to add. Finally, Bhakti is part of the teaching, of course. There's so many aspects to it. Firstly, chanting the divine name, you see that throughout his life, something that he stressed very much. When we speak of Bhakti here, interestingly, he considered himself a follower of a Shaivite sect. So he was initiated into a Shaivite sect, but yet his whole life was basically a Vaishnava life. It was all about Vittal. He did the commentary about the Bhagavad Gita, and all the saints around him, they were followers of Vittal. There's an interesting quote here in relation to Bhakti, which I want to read out to you. It is a matter of experience and not of words. The love of a devotee can be compared with the aggregate of all terrestrial loves. All terrestrial loves. For there is actually no comparison to the highest feeling the human mind is capable of. God is a sequel. Yet the force which propels the heart towards him is even stronger than that of a lover for his beloved. Could one say it is like the urge of embracing one's mother and lover at one and the same time? In God, a devotee finds final and complete fulfillment of thousands of previous lives yearning for such a moment. The bliss is that of desirelessness and of all-embracing love. Fear and anxiety take to their heels, and peace infinite abides. Beautiful quote about, again, the essence. Actually, there's a lot in his short life. He gave a lot of pearls, a lot of how do you say, metaphors that are very revealing. And it resembles what Guruji is telling us. So often when I was reading and reflecting on what Jñāneśvara is saying, it's the same that Guruji is repeating now, just giving it to us for the time that we live in. So as we move towards the end, just a quick run through, because during that of the saints that were around Jñāneśvara, I don't want to spend too much time because this is now about Jñāneśvara, but one of the relationships that stands out is that of Namdev, because when they met, there was a deep connection between the two of them. Namdev is considered to be an incarnation of Uddhava, which was the greatest friend of Krishna. So that relationship, in a way, got restaged during that time, and there's many wonderful episodes between the two. They then went on a pilgrimage to the north, and along that way they taught and sang and initiated many people into the Varkari movement, because Varkari means basically, Vari is pilgrimage. So it's those who are entertaining their pilgrimage. So this was the beginning of the Varkari movement, the life of Jñāneśvara and the life of Sant Namdev and the other saints, such as Janabai, who was the maidservant of Namdev. There was a whole play that we staged not too long ago about her life. Savatamali, the gardener, just to name a few. He was the one who hid Krishna in his heart. Gorakumbha, the potter, another famous story that we had also done a play on him. Great miraculous story where he accidentally stepped and killed his son, who was then later on revived by Vital. These were all extraordinary saints. This was an aggregation of saints that was absolutely mind-blowing. Each one of them, it can be considered a great saint in his own right. So this takes me to the end part, the samadhi of Sant Jñāneśvara. As they were celebrating with Namdev, they came down from that pilgrimage back to Alandi. Sant Jñāneśvara declared that he wants to leave. Imagine, at the age of 21. And he then left. This was not just an empty threat. I'm stressing that because Guruji himself has, over the years, started, the first time I heard him say was in 2008, when he said, I'm going to leave in 7 years. And then he corrected himself later on, said, no, I'm not going to leave. I'm going to leave when my mission is completed. And over the years, there were a few similar instances like that to remind us not to take Guruji for granted, because we don't know how long he's amongst us. In Sant Jñāneśvara's case, I don't think anybody expected a 21-year-old just to leave, but he did, because his mission was complete. He knows when his mission is complete. We don't know. We shouldn't speculate. So he applied a certain technique called Sanjivan Samadhi, where you withdraw the life force gradually from the body, and then the soul pierces through the crown chakra and leaves. And everybody was very sad when he declared that. There were several days of chanting, kirtan, non-stop. They created this pit, this hole with stairs leading down. It's like a cave. And then he went there, he sat into meditation posture, and then he left the body. They closed the cave for good. And everybody was, of course, grieving. It was a sad moment, but he consoled them. He said, before he left, he said, "Forgive me, my friends, if I have ever offended any of you, and kindly grant me permission to go." And then he said, don't worry, let Vital be your support. Everybody chanted Jai Jai Shri Jñāneśvara, and the cave was closed forever. 300 years later, this happened in Alandi. 300 years later, Sant Eknath, another great saint, he built a temple there for Sant Jñāneśvara. And within 1.5 years of his passing, everybody else left as well. Meaning Sopan, in this order, Sopan left, then Muktabai, then Nivritti, and also Changdev. Before I end, let's take a sip. I want to give you a few more. Actually, sorry, there is this part here still. So just some notices about notifications about materials that one can use to dive deeper into his life. There's even cartoons, like you see there. But one source is called Saints of Maharashtra, very nice, where you get the life of Sant Jñāneśvara, but also Namdev and all the others. It's a nice, relatively compact account. And also the stories of Indian saints, or better known for us as Bhakta Vijaya. Yeah, this is this very wonderful compilation. It's quite thick, 2 volumes, put together by Mahipati, who was a saintly figure who lived a few hundred years ago, who compiled all these stories for us to have access to them. Otherwise, this knowledge would be lost. So, if you approach me later on, I can show you a way to get hold of that. And on a final note, with regards to materials, there's several movies. This one is my favorite one. I haven't actually watched all of them, but this one is really a must, if you ask me, if you want to know more about Sant Jñāneśvara. And it's about 2 hours long. Beautiful bhav, as beautiful music in it as well. And then there are also more recent series, but they are not available in English. Like one is called Jñāneśvara Mauli. Mauli, again, this term for mother. It has more than 300 episodes, but it's in Marathi. So, unfortunately, no subtitles. So that is the end of the slides. Just to conclude the session, I just want to give you a few more bonus teachings of Sant Jñāneśvara that I feel I should add, because I think I can add a few more minutes. He said, only when physical and mental egoism is removed by knowledge does the soul free itself and becomes one with Brahman. So again, this emphasis on knowledge. We need to have the right knowledge. It's not difficult, but we need to have it. He advised both Shaivites and Vaishnavas to repeat God's name at all times. I mentioned it already earlier, but this is such an important point to just pressing it back home. He said, what is God realization if not complete identification with Him? So this is connected to chanting God's name. Chanting God's name is that process of identification with Him. And if we don't do that, that's why Guruji is pressing. There is no God realization. We have to put our mind on God. The easiest and best and most powerful way to do that is to chant God's name. So these 2 things that Guruji stressed on Guru Purnima, japa, chant God's name, and read the Bhagavad Gita. That's like the safety package to take you safely home. People shouldn't be, a few more points, people shouldn't be impatient as even the sun. So whilst having said that, don't be impatient. Even the sun doesn't reach the zenith in a matter of seconds. Progress takes its own time. A devotee is at one with other devotees, also an important point. Loving all those who love God. So this encouragement of devotees, love one another. That's also what Jesus actually said. The waves of the 2 lovers of God mingle and mix with each other. When I say love, it's obviously a divine kind of love. Then he said, the beautiful description of the oneness of devotees with God. When one mirror reflects another, which reflects which? I repeat. When one mirror reflects another, which reflects which? So there's the two mirrors, one symbolizes God, the other one symbolizes the devotee. It's a beautiful image to show the oneness, the unity between God and his devotees. Because not only does Guruji reflect, he's the perfect mirror, we often use that analogy, but we want to become also like a mirror, mirroring him. Day and night, I like this one also very much, because it's associated with the beginning of my journey with Guruji. Day and night, one's primary duty should be to achieve the happiness of the human race. Our own interests come second. And just yesterday, Guruji said, what people can contribute to this world, we should ask ourselves that. What can you contribute to this world? That is spirituality. 2 more final points. No, actually just one, because one I already made. One ought to meditate on death before one's senses dim with the onset of senility. So don't wait, don't become old, and then you are like if you even become old, and then you become weak and you become senile, and then you don't have the strength or the mental capacity to think of God and to meditate on death. Like, this should happen. Make death your friend now, so that you live life to the fullest. This advice we hear over and over again, also from other saints. Sant Jñāneśvara also made this one. So I think this gives us a nice taste of some of the teachings of Sant Jñāneśvara. There is more to it. If you dive into the books, you will pick up more. Very, very inspiring life story. Please watch the movie and hope that this little presentation was able to convey a little bit of this extraordinary saint's life. Jai Gurudev.